Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So today in this video I thought I'd talk about cooling systems. There's a lot of people out there with their cooling system challenges in their classic cars, and I've certainly had mine, and I've spent a lot of time experimenting with different things. I've played with thermostats, rads, fans, fan shrouds, all kinds of things. Now this is a 454 big block Chevy, but some of the information in this video will apply to just about anything, any classic car that you happen to own. So first off, if you are having issues with your car running a little hotter in the summertime, before you blame the cooling system, make sure the thing's tuned properly. Make sure that your timing's where it needs to be. If you've got if you've made some modifications, if you've got a small block Chevy, a big block Chevy, or whatever it is you're driving, and you've done some, basic mods, if you've added headers or carb intake cam, that sort of thing, a lot of those, my experience with that is these engines like to have a little bit more advanced than what would have been recommended from the factory. So you might find that if you bump the timing up a little bit, it'll actually run a little cooler for you. If it's retarded too far, or if you're going by those factory specs, your car may run a little hotter for you. So that's the first thing to look at. If you are having issues with cooling, make sure that the thing's tuned properly, and then go on from there. Now the first thing I'd like to do when diagnosing any cooling system problems, I like to get one of these things. These are a real valuable tool. This is just a little infrared temperature gauge, and these things work good. If you want, there's a lot of cheaper ones out there. This one's not bad. I can't remember what I paid for this one, but you can get them at Princess Auto in Canada. Harbor Freight, if you're in the States, they're like 30-40 bucks. They're really cheap. And I've used these for diagnosing other things as well. If you want to see how your engine's running, if all your cylinders are, it's banging on all 8 cylinders, you can hit each header tube with this or different parts of the engine to make sure that the thing's firing properly, so you can use it for a tune-up diagnostic as well. I've also used this thing for diagnosing something like if you suspect that you've got a caliper that's dragging, well, you can go for a ride in the car and then hit each one of the rotors with this gun, and it'll tell you if one's hotter than the other. I bought one of these for my wife as well. I bought her a cheaper version. My wife likes to play with horses. She's got some horses, and if one of those horses has an injury or a sore spot, she can kind of identify it with this heat gun. They can pinpoint the injury because, of course, the injury would be a hot spot on the animal, so they can kind of pinpoint it. But it's got a million uses. These things are great for all kinds of things. Everybody should have one of these in their toolbox. Great tool. So yeah, don't just go by the gauge and assume that the car is running hot. Get this thing out. Make sure you can hit the rad hoses, the thermostat housing, the heads. This will tell you what's going on, and if your gauge is accurate in the car, it should be pretty close to this thing here. So now in this particular car, this came from the factory with all its, it was a full gauge package. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it here, but yeah, it's going to be hard to tell. But this is a fully gauged car, so it's got all, it's got a temperature gauge, an oil pressure gauge, a generator gauge. It's got all that stuff. But there's no numbers on these gauges in these old cars. So I like to have a number kind of staring at me and telling me what's going on. So I use these Autometer analog gauges. They work pretty good. I like having that. I like just to be able to tell what kind of numbers are the car's making, and then I use this to confirm that it's actually accurate or not. So it's really helpful to know. Now, certainly if you're working on a muscle car or some kind of a classic car, and you have the original copper brass rad. Now, first off, you know, if it's going to work for your application, if that rad is big enough and it just needs to be cleaned, or maybe the tanks need a little bit of work, I'd certainly recommend that you guys stick with that. The copper brass stuff, I mean, it's been around since the beginning of cars, and the stuff really works good. Now, if it needs to be a full, if the copper brass rad needs a full recore, then you're going to find it's going to be very expensive, and you'll have to decide from that point. But if it's workable for your application, certainly try and stick with that. And the reason I say that is the copper brass stuff is it's repairable. If you have problems down the road, you can actually repair that rad, whereas the aluminum stuff that you buy today, well, in a lot of cases, it's, you know, it's not repairable. I did have a rad that with a little stone bruise in it, and it nicked a cooling tube on me, and I was able to find a guy that could TIG weld it for me, and it worked out. But that's a rare opportunity that actually works out. In most cases, most rad shops, they just toss these things in the recycle bin, and you buy a new one. So now, last winter, I actually went through the entire cooling system in this car. There was a few things that were going on. My water pump, it started to, you know, chatter a little bit for me. And my heater core, I noticed a little bit of a mist late in the season on my windows. So I decided to change the heater core, the water pump, the thermostat housing, and now this rad I had bought midsummer. I actually, the rad that I had in here when I did the big block swap was a Champion rad. Now, the Champion rads, they're a little bit of a cheaper option. I've had a number of them now. I think that would have been the third Champion rad I bought. They got really good reviews online. However, it is now the company that sells those rads, I believe it's called American Eagle. They're based, I think, in California, and they make no bones about it. Those Champion rads are Chinese made, and they do offer a in-house American made, handmade version that they make themselves, and then the Champion version would be their cheaper rad that they have. So they're really, I mean, the price is attractive. I think I bought the rad for $200. This is not a Champion in this car. This is actually a Performance World. And so far this guy's working out okay. There's a bit of a story attached to that whole thing, but I had a Champion in here, and the thing to remember with a lot of those cheaper rads and the Champion, the core is actually glued to the tanks in those things. So what had happened with mine, you know, and like I said, I had a number of them. They all worked well. They're a really pretty looking rad. They're polished. The welds on them look amazing. They have drain petcocks on them. They have provisions for transmission cooler lines. They're a great looking rad, and I think I bought it for $200. It wasn't a bad deal at all. It's really kind of attractive. Anyway, what happened was it started to separate at that point where it is glued to the tank. So I took it into a rad shop, and of course they deemed it unrepairable. It went straight into the recycle bin, and I ended up buying this one. Now this is a Performance World. So far it's working okay for me. Now there is a lot of better aluminum rads out there. Certainly Ron Davis makes great rads. Griffin makes great rads. There's a whole host of good radiators out there. But they are expensive. Bad thing is, most cases are unrepairable. So when that rad fails, it's basically garbage. In most cases. So that's why I recommend you go to the copper brass stuff. Now some people are going to argue that you know, the aluminum stuff, it's a lighter material. It dissipates heat much quicker, and I'm not going to get into all the science behind the two dissimilar metals, but I can tell you the main reason that all our manufacturers have gone to, you know, all your automotive manufacturers have gone to aluminum today with plastic tanks is solely based on cost. The copper brass stuff has become extremely expensive, and that's the reason our manufacturers are going this way now. And unfortunately, if you're, you know, working on a muscle car or a custom or a classic, you know, unfortunately we're faced with, you know, these aluminum rads. I'm not a big fan, but they do work, and this one seems to be working okay the last couple years anyway. Yeah, so that, you know, kind of covers rads, guys. There's lots of options out there. It can get confusing. Like I say, I had a lot of champions, and they seem to work really good for me up until the last one I had in this car. And yeah, it's a Chinese made. It's super cheap. But you got to spend the money if you want the real good ones. So yeah, so if that kind of covers rads, we can talk about fans. Now, I've had cars with electric fans. You know, I've played with the electric fan thing, certainly when space was an issue. In the last car I built, I ended up going with an electric fan. My only recommendation with that is make sure you got a really good quality one with makes good CFM, and you got to run relays to those things. That's the only way to get as much power out of them and make them work properly is run a relay to that thing. And if you got two fans, then you should have two relays. That's really important. The last car I built had electric fans, and it gave me a lot of issues. I wasn't really happy with the cooling system in that car. It gave me a lot of problems. So when I put this car together, I wanted to keep, you know, kind of on the stock side of things. This is a tried and true mechanical fan here. This is 7-blade. It really blows your hair back when this thing's running, and spacing is important when you set these things up. So it's set up in the shroud, so that fan is just halfway, the blades are halfway into the shroud and halfway out. So it's basically, I was able to get that with a 1-inch spacer. So that spacing is really important. You don't want it in too far, because it's just going to move air around inside the shroud, and you don't want it out too far because it won't actually pull good for you. So spacing is really important. Yeah, the bigger the better when it comes to fans, and this is just a straight up mechanical thing. Worked great. While we're talking about fans, when I first bought this car, it had a small block Chevy in it. It was a 383 stroker, and it had one of these things on. Now, I absolutely hate these things. These can be dangerous. I don't know if you can see it in the video here, but this shortly after I bought the car, I got rid of this thing in a hurry. There you go. You can kind of see the cracks. So this blade was ready to come off of here, and it was, you know, I really hate these things. They're riveted together. They do work, but man, they're dangerous. And if one of these blades was to come off, you can see a crack right there, and a big one right across here. These things are dangerous, and it can do a lot of damage when that comes off of there. So yeah, if you're going with a mechanical fan, stay away from those. They're terrible. Now, what else could we talk about here? So when I did my upgrades last winter, I did a water pump, did the rad, I also did a heater core. My heater core, as I mentioned, was starting to leak. Now, I looked on the internet, and I can only find one company that had copper brass heater cores for a 68 Chevelle. And yeah, there's not a lot available out there in the copper brass, and I really wanted to stay with the copper brass if I could. Like I said, that stuff's repairable. And the one company was Speedway Motors. Now these guys were really great. I think I placed my order on a Sunday afternoon. I had a little trouble. I don't know if it was something I was doing wrong online or something was wrong with the website, but I phoned their customer service. Guy was really helpful. He helped me out. And that was, like I say, a Sunday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, I was holding this thing. So the heater core cost me $65. Now this is Canadian stuff here, so, and by the time it was shipped to me, it was like $109. So, you know, worth it. This is my old core here, and you can see where this guy was leaking. So I was glad to get that replaced, and I was really happy that I was able to find an actual copper brass unit. I know a lot of guys out there are kind of forced to go with aluminum stuff, and I've heard a lot of bad things about the aluminum heater cores, so I was really happy to actually find one that will fit this car. So that there is some available out there at Speedway Motors for well, $109 Canadian with shipping, and that's to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So yeah, the aluminum stuff, a lot of guys, I have a friend that has a 67 Chevelle. There's nothing available for 67 Chevelles apparently other than aluminum, and he was forced to put an aluminum heater core in, and it leaked. And there was also some fitment issues he mentioned with that thing, but anyway, I was able to get a copper brass one in there. I'm really happy about it. Speedway Motors, I wouldn't hesitate to order from them guys again. They were super good to me. Like I say, I've never actually, even ordering stuff in Canada, I've never had stuff come to my door that quickly. So that was really impressive. So big hats off to those guys. So yeah, did the water pump. Now the thermostat. I did a lot of experimenting with thermostats. Actually, when I got this thing all together, I noticed when the first time I ran it, the top hose got hot right away. And I knew that the new thermostat I popped in there wasn't actually holding. It was leaking. So that's a little thing that you got to watch for. Now, I did a lot of experimenting with thermostats. I've tried all kinds of different brands. And one way you can test them is actually throw them in a pot of boiling water. Use your little heat gun here. See what temperature that thing opens, or if it opens, or when it opens. And I didn't find any. I think I found 2 out of 7 that actually opened at the advertised rate, or the advertised temperature, based on my heat gun. Some of them, open 10-20 degrees later than they were supposed to. So as an example, what I found works for me here. I run a high flow Mr. Gasket 170 degree, and it opens when it's supposed to. This thing runs 170 degrees regardless of what the outside temperature is, whether it's super hot or super cold outside. And it's consistent. So I'm really happy with the setup in this car now. It works super good. Rad Caps. Rad Caps, you got to kind of watch the older cars. This is a 16 pound here, so how it works is basically the higher the pressure, the higher the boiling point in the car. So you want most of these muscle cars, classic cars, 16 pounds is sufficient. Now a lot of people are confused with coolant recovery and then overflow systems. I think I see a lot of guys putting water in their overflow system, thinking that they've got a coolant recovery in their older car. And most of these older cars, they never had coolant recovery systems. So that's just an overflow setup on there. The coolant recovery systems is a 2-stage Rad Cap. So it allows water to go into your recovery tank and then suck it back out as it cools down. So the old cars don't do that. So if you're confused about that, the newer cars do that. They have coolant recovery systems in them. These old guys don't. So just be aware that it's different from one to the other. Yeah, so airflow is an issue. One thing I wanted to mention here also, I don't know if you can see it here in the video. I've got a separate trans cooler there. It's a fairly large one. Now I've experimented with the spacing on that. I found that what works on here, I've got about a 2-inch space from the Rad. It's kind of hard to see in there. There's a 2-inch airspace in between the Rad and this transmission cooler. And I seem to get the best airflow that way. I don't know what else I could cover here, guys. Certainly if you're having issues with the cooling system in your car, there's lots of experimenting you can do. Start with the tune-up of the car. You know, make sure your Rad is and your water pump's working. You can run the car with the Rad cap off. Make sure that you've got some circulation going on in there. Thermostats are important. And now I run a 170, as I mentioned in here, and running this big block at 170 degrees isn't the most efficient. Certainly if I was worried about gas mileage, I probably wouldn't be running a big block. So the hotter you run these, now it's not hard to run these things at 200 degrees. It's not bad for them at all. In fact, they tend to run more efficiently the hotter they are. But I kind of like having a little bit of a buffer zone. So, and I'm not concerned about gas mileage. If you are, you know, run a 195 in your car. That's probably the way that it came when it was brand new from the factory. So certainly not a bad thing for it. And if it runs, you know, 200 degrees, 210 degrees, that's not a bad temperature. When it gets up to about that 230, 240, you're getting into the danger zone. And yeah, you're going to want to, you know, try and figure that out. There's so many different things you can do to, you know, to get these things to run the right temperature. And, you know, it gets pretty hot here in Saskatchewan in the summer. Certainly when it is hot and nice out, that you want to be able to get in these cars and drive them. Yeah. So, yeah, lots of little things to go over and think about. Another one is coolant. Now, in this car, I like to run a 70-30 mix. A lot of guys run a 50-50 mix. And this is just, you know, this is not a daily driver. It only gets driven in the summertime. It gets parked in the winter. In the garage here, it doesn't see any colder than, you know, -5 degrees Celsius. So I run a 70-30 mix. You have to keep in mind that glycol, you have to have some in there, but glycol or antifreeze, it does not cool your engine. It's the water that actually does the cooling. The glycol, you have to have it in there because water by itself is kind of a corrosive thing. You want to be able to, it does lubricate things, having glycol in there, and of course it keeps things from freezing, so you got to have something in there. I also like to run a water wetter, or one common one is purple ice. I like to use that in all my cars. They say that by using that, your car will run about 15 degrees cooler. I can't honestly say I've noticed a difference in 15 degrees, maybe 2, 3, 4 degrees difference just using that additive. So I like to run that in there as well. Yeah, so a couple little things. You know, make sure the thing's tuned properly. You got good airflow, you got good spacing. Some guys run shrouds, some guys don't. Fans are important. You know, your coolant mix is another one you can play with. Yeah, so, but make sure you get yourself one of these little temperature gauges. Maybe the car isn't running hot at all. Maybe it's just your gauges isn't accurate. I have a lot of friends that don't put any analog gauges. They like to use the factory style gauge with just a little dial and no numbers, and that's fine. They like that factory look. But unless you have one of these things, you don't actually know what your car is doing. So it's good to have that. They're, like I say, they're cheap. So yeah, I hope I covered most of the stuff, guys. Just experiment with stuff. There's a lot of different things you can do. Like I say, these systems are dead simple, and every car is different. Every car is designed differently. The front of these cars are all different. The size of the rads, the size of the engines. If you've done any modifications, then yeah, you gotta maybe bump up the timing and just play with different. You're gonna eventually get it. Every time I made a change, whether it was a thermostat or you know, I moved a fan around or something, and I saw improvement, then you're gonna know that you're in the right direction. So just keep experimenting, and you'll get it figured out. So hopefully that helps somebody. This sort of applies to anybody in any type of car, any type of classic car. So, you know, try those things, guys. Experiment with stuff, and you'll get it sorted out. Thanks very much for walking.